My rose over here looks very sad. I picked it from my garden like last week. Don't think I was very happy being picked. It wasn't a very great rose in the first place. There's some really nice ones out there though, so I might go and pick them today. Good morning everybody, welcome back to the Morning Bible. It's wonderful to have you, wonderful to see you. It's quite early, but I'm trying to get back in the habit of waking up early, so if I'm a little bit groggy, forgive me. We are in Luke chapter 12 once again. We're on verse 8. It's weird, this is the third video of chapter 12 and we're only on verse 8 so far. It just shows you how dense of a chapter this is. So let's just jump straight in and start reading. Luke 12 chapter 8. And I tell you, this is Jesus speaking once again, and I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man also will acknowledge before the angels of God. But the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but the one who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. And when they bring you before the synagogues and the rulers and the authorities, do not be anxious about how you should defend yourself or what you should say. For the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say. So, it's another fairly short passage today, but it's Jesus essentially talking about how the way that you act towards him will sort of determine the way that you'll be represented by him in future. And so if you deny him, if you turn yourself away from Jesus, then you won't be welcomed into the kingdom. If you blaspheme against the Holy Spirit especially, you'll have serious problems. But if you turn to Jesus and you put your faith in him, then you'll be provided for, you'll be protected, and you'll be helped. So let's go through it bit by bit and see what he's saying. So verse 8 from the top, it says, "And I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man also will acknowledge before the angels of God." So what does he mean by acknowledge? Well, essentially it means if you acknowledge that I am the Son of God, you being you, and the I in this situation being Jesus, he's saying, if you acknowledge that I'm the Son of God, then I will acknowledge your faith before God. So he's essentially saying, look, after you die or after the new kingdom is brought about, God will be there sat on his throne, and people will come before him, and Jesus will be giving accounts of these people to him. And he's saying, look, if you acknowledge me before the people around you, then once you get into that throne room, once you get up to heaven, I will say to God that you've been faithful, that you believed, that you've acknowledged us, and that you stood by us. And he's saying he'll do that before all the angels of God. And so the angels are God's messengers. They are a lot of the ways like God acts throughout the Bible is through angels. He can send them down to send messages. He can also send them down to protect people. There's all this sort of spiritual warfare of angels fighting demons, so there's an idea of protection there as well. So if Jesus is acknowledging you before these angels, then that means all of these angels are going to be backing you, are going to be supporting you, and that just takes a lot of anxiety off knowing that you've got angels protecting you. He says, but the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. And so if the people around you come up to you and start hounding you saying, do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe that he's the Son of God? If you deny Jesus before these people, then Jesus will deny you before the Father, essentially. Well, before the angels of God is what the passage is saying specifically. And so that's fairly straightforward, that's fairly clear cut. But the next verse is actually something that I didn't realise, but a lot of people have had quite a lot of debate over this verse for quite a while. And so let's have a little look at it. It's from verse 10. It says, "And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but the one who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven." So this is sort of part 2 of this little chunk. So Jesus is essentially distinguishing two parts of the Trinity from each other. We've talked about the Trinity before. You have the Father, who is sort of the classic image of God that everyone has. He is sat up in heaven, he is sat in his throne room, he is the creator of all things, orchestrator of all things, he is the Father of all things. And then you have Jesus, who is the Son. We know Jesus, we're following his works on earth. And then there's the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is what God sends down through Jesus. It's something that's in each of us, and it's how God acts in the world. The Holy Spirit, casts out demons, it heals people, it does all sorts of miracles, basically. It restores people, it does crazy things that you'd never expect. The Holy Spirit is God's way of acting in the world. And some of those miracles aren't necessarily these huge sort of nature-bending, crazy events. Some of these miracles are very just sort of grounded and normal. A lot of people have very sort of normal interventions from the Holy Spirit in their life that happen quite regularly, where God will just step in and send his Spirit down to give you comfort, give you peace, protect you from something specific, heal you from something small. The Holy Spirit isn't just this huge thing. So that's sort of a quick rundown of what the Trinity looks like. And this verse talks about two parts of that Trinity. It says, anyone who says a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven. So the Son of Man here is referring to Jesus. He's talking about himself. Anyone who speaks out against him will be forgiven. But one who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. So that's quite a big thing to say, because the whole purpose of Jesus coming is to forgive people, to welcome people into the kingdom, and all the rest of it. And Jesus is really underscoring here then how significant of a thing it is to blaspheme against the Holy Spirit. So why is the distinction made between the two? Well, the passage doesn't explicitly say, and so to sort of come down on anything with a lot of certainty, especially from my level of biblical knowledge, would not be a very smart thing to do. So take everything that I'm about to say sort of with a grain of salt, knowing that this is just sort of my reading of it and my initial thoughts, and they are very much subject to change as I learn more about the Bible. But the way I sort of see it now is when Jesus says, anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven. So one of the reasons why this sort of makes sense to me is because we see this happening later on in Jesus' life. Peter, who is sort of his close, loyal disciple, Jesus says, you're going to deny me 3 times. And lo and behold, Peter does. A crowd surround Peter, they're like, do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in Jesus? Are you one of his disciples? Are you one of his followers? And Peter says, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I don't know the guy. I've never seen him before. He says it 3 times. He repeats it 3 times. And so one of Jesus's, one of the main disciples, one of the guys who Jesus invites in with him for all these sort of private miracles, Peter denies Jesus. And yet, at the end, Jesus welcomes him back in. He restores him. He asks Peter to tell him that he loves him 3 times. Peter does so, and by doing so, it sort of reverses that. He's forgiven, and the church ends up being built around Peter. It's a really exciting sort of story of his life in the book of Acts. And so we see that someone who blasphemes someone who speaks against the Son of Man will be forgiven. But the one who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not. So what's the difference here? Well, the Holy Spirit isn't man. I think this is one of the key things, is Jesus is saying, look, people can see me and people can assume that I'm just a guy, or they can hear about me and assume that I'm just a guy, because they see people around them all the time. They, if they hear that a person is doing something, without them looking too much into it, it's very easy for them to just dismiss that and speak against that. But if it's the Holy Spirit, that doesn't have that sort of human form that people can dismiss. That is God directly acting. It's God's direct actions. And so blaspheming against that sort of more direct force of God, blaspheming against a force that's doing miracles, that's working healings, that's protecting people, that's giving people peace, that's doing all these good things, blaspheming against that is a very serious offence. It's a very serious thing to do. Whereas with Jesus, I'm not saying that, it's not a problem to speak out against Jesus. Obviously it is. But Jesus is, you can understand why someone would hear about Jesus very vaguely, think he's just a guy, and dismiss him. And so there's kind of a difference there. I'm not trying to justify speaking against Jesus, and I'm not trying to, like I said, take everything I've just said with a grain of salt. So let's look at the last little part of this passage. It's from verse 11. It says, and when they bring you before the synagogues and the rulers and the authorities, do not be anxious about how you should defend yourself or what you should say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say. And so Jesus here is talking about when people get brought before the courts, when people get brought out and questioned and sort of interrogated about their beliefs. And this is like a specific thing. This isn't just like, oh, if you've been involved in some tax evasion and you get brought before the courts, the Holy Spirit will speak for you. It's like, no, Jesus is saying specifically for his followers, because Jesus knows that the Jewish authorities are going to start harassing these people, are going to start chasing them down, are going to start trying to sort of squash this movement. And so Jesus is saying, look, in those moments, just rest assured knowing that the Holy Spirit will vouch for you. Because you've vouched for the Holy Spirit to the people around you, because you've made the account of God, you've acknowledged Jesus, you've done all the rest of it to the people around you. When you get brought into court, the Holy Spirit is going to come and it's going to give you the words to say, it's going to protect you, and it's going to stand by you. And we see that happening throughout the rest of the Bible as well, which is really cool. So yeah, we're going to leave it there today. It's a good little passage. Like I said, I don't have all the answers sometimes, but that's what sort of going away and doing your own reading, your own research is all about. So I'll leave that in your court. But for now, I'll say goodbye. I'll see you tomorrow. Much love. Stay safe. Bye bye bye.